Not every consumer is a patient, but every patient is a consumer.
It's not that people have ideas, it's that ideas have people.
We have 320 million ECGs in our cloud.
I feel like AliveCor is a great consumer brand that happens to be medical device.
And all of a sudden we get a phone call from GE Healthcare and they said, we'd like to buy your company. When you're competing against Apple, Samsung, and Google, the smartphone is the front door to healthcare. Doc, am I going to die? Not today, my friend, not today.
You can't replace part of the brain.
Like, you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the puppets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company that held up high. A lot of things.
The state of medtech with your host, Omar Khateeb.
I do like that you were earlier complaining about how you're working too much and that startups are the young person's game. I think you're a young guy at heart, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's what I try to convey to my children and grandchildren. Okay, so that your grandpa's not dead yet. As the great philosopher Pitbull says, any day above ground's a great day.
This is going to be an absolutely amazing podcast, starting with that. So, well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Been a long time coming. You know, many of you know Dr. David Albert, who's the founder of AliveCor, really the pioneers of personal cardiac monitoring. If you've been in the industry as long as I have, you remember back in the time when smartphones were first starting to be used in the healthcare space. And, you know, I remember seeing a video a long time ago. Actually, I think I was in... Gosh, when your video came out, I was actually in my second year of medical school where someone showed me and said, hey, like there's a doctor who found a way to like, you know, show ECG on a phone. I'm like, there's no way. And I remember seeing the video and I was like, oh my God. So Dr. Albert, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
I was going to say you were in kindergarten at the time, but Omar, so
you're I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I'm well away.
Fantastic. And before we get into it, I have to share with the audience how we ended up meeting. So you and I have been connected for a long time on LinkedIn, and I went to Mayo Clinic's. I got invited, thanks to Shai, as a guest of Mayo Clinic's inaugural Cardiology and Radiology AI Summit. And you were on stage, and I was like, oh my God, there he is in all his glory, Dr. Albert. I got to go. I can finally go and meet him. And I couldn't seem to find you afterwards. I was like, oh, well, he's like, maybe in the future. I remember sitting down at a random cocktail hour and then here you come in and sit right next to me. And I'm like, thank you, God. And we had a great conversation.
Yes, we did. Took a great selfie, by the way. Thank you.
Fantastic. You know what? The followers loved it. The internet loved it. Maybe a good place to start. I think everyone knows you for being the founder of AliveCor, but I want to go back to who is David Albert? Like, where did you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And how did you get started in medicine?
That's a long story. So I'm glad we have a lot of time. I grew up in two places that were very different. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and rural Oklahoma. I'm actually in Oklahoma City, where the NBA Finals will start this coming Thursday. The Oklahoma City.
And I'm pulling for OKC.
I think they're the favorite, actually, but it's bad to be the favorite. My father was a government official, actually a very, very high up government official. And so I went to school in Washington, D.C., up through high school. And then I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. And then I went to Duke for medical school and biomedical engineering graduate school. And so it's an incredible contrast. I learned to hunt and fish from a young age back in Oklahoma. And literally we lived in rural Oklahoma. My dad, despite the fact that he was a Rhodes Scholar, grew up on a farm. And so a long time ago, he passed away 25 years ago at age 91. So I'm looking forward to another 21 years at least at age 70 here. And so it was a great contrast. It was interesting. Most of my friends didn't have that kind of dual life. And I wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. And that was because I watched TV. And there was a TV show called Ben Casey. Ben Casey was a neurosurgeon, which is interesting. Back in the 60s, to a show about neurosurgeons, we have many, many medical shows. The Pit is the latest rendition of a medical drama. And Ben Casey was a neurosurgeon. A lot of his patients died, which in the 60s was probably not too far wrong. And so, but I just thought this guy does amazing things. And I almost became a neurosurgeon. The people at Duke wanted me to be a neurosurgeon, but I was like, nah. So I wanted to be a doctor from a young age. And I went to Harvard saying I'm going to be a doctor. And, but when I got there, my first week, I had an advisor, and he was at Harvard Law School. And he said, well, I sat down with him, didn't know him, but he happened to be from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm going later today. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to medical school. He says, well, you're going to get into medical school, so you can do anything you want. He said, yeah, you're going to have some requirements, but you can do anything you want. You don't have to be a biochemistry major. And that was an insight to me. I didn't know, really? He said, yeah, Dave, you're going to get into medical school. And he knew. So, by the way, my father's name was Carl Albert. He was the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives from 70 to 76. He was first in line for the presidency twice, when Spiro Agnew resigned in 1973, and then when Richard Nixon resigned. So he was in Congress for 30 years. And so this guy knew that. And he says, you come back to the University of Oklahoma and go to medical school. I've seen your grades. Yeah, you're not going to have a problem. So what did I do? I majored in government. And why did I do that? Actually, I had no interest in going to politics ever in my whole life. People always ask me, why didn't you come back to Oklahoma and go into politics? Because that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a doctor. And so, but I always wondered what my dad did for a living. That sounds crazy. In my class, I had one of the Bush brothers, Neil Bush. I had the son of the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson. These were my classmates. I had the son of a very famous Illinois senator, Charles Percy. So that's a good thing, because I went to this little boys' private school where it didn't matter who your dad was. It was irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant. And that's good, so that kids don't get screwed up. So I majored in government, even though I took all the, inorganic, organic, calculus, physics, all those things. I wanted to see what my dad did, and I learned what my dad did, and it was really cool. And I got into medical school. I had to take the MCAT, and I did fine on that. And here's a funny thing. So I got, the membership has its privileges. I got to interview at Duke in the spring of my junior year. Okay. Now, usually it'd be the next, when you're in senior year, but I got to interview the spring of my junior year. And when I left Cambridge, Massachusetts, it was 33 degrees. When I got to Durham, North Carolina, it was 78 degrees. And the women were dressed completely differently than they were up north. It was a completely different place. And I said, yeah, this is where I want to go to medical school. Now I applied and got into the University of Oklahoma. I had a lot of friends who wanted me to do that, and I did. I only applied to those two medical schools. And so I said, I'm going to Duke. And then my story gets even stranger. It gets even stranger. Do you want to hear the stranger part of this? Okay.
I do want to hear the stranger part of it.
So I'm just on the track. I'm going to be a cardiologist. I decided this is what I wanted to be. I had a mentor who was my dad's doctor here in Oklahoma City. He was his cardiologist. He had gone to Duke and then had done his residency, his cardiology fellowship at Duke. He introduced me to two of his classmates. He's the only one that's still alive. The other two classmates who were at Duke, pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Paige Anderson, magnificent guy, and one of the world's experts on ECG, Dr. Galen Wagner. Both of them have passed away. So now I know I'm old because all my mentors have passed away. He introduced me to both of them who had been in his medical school class at Duke. And I said, this is what I want to do. So I finished my third year of medical school. And at Duke, I was doing some research, and I had literally 9 months of medical school left. That's all I had left. And my dad had a heart attack. And so I flew back here to Oklahoma City, where he was here at the University of Oklahoma. I'm literally 2 blocks away from the university because I'm going to be doing work there this week. And he did fine. He did fine, lived another 20 years. But cardiac rehab. They said, you live out in the country, so you're not going to come here. So what we'd like you to do is to walk and take your heart rate, walk till your heart rate's 120 beats a minute. And I knew my dad, who was not going to be able to do that. He was 71 years old. He just wasn't. This was not no capability. And at the time, there was no Apple Watch. There was no Polar chest strap. There was no heart rate monitor at the time. And so I went back to Duke, and I had a classmate of mine who's a Hopkins former, I think he's probably retired now, Hopkins pulmonologist. He had been an undergraduate biomedical engineer at Duke. And I said, Phil, can you know somebody who might be able to make me a heart rate monitor? And he said, yeah, one of my classmates is in graduate school here at Duke in biomedical engineering, and he's getting his PhD. Why don't you talk to him? So he introduced me to him, and I went, and I said, this is what I need you to do. And he said, okay, I'll do it, $200, which, by the way, in 1980 was an awful lot of money to me. It meant my ramen noodle budget had just dropped precipitously, but I did it. I gave him $200. I mean, literally, that was a lot of money. And 2 months later, he comes to me. My dad's walking without monitoring his heart rate. And he brings me a breadboard with a bunch of wires. And he says, it doesn't work, but I'm not going to do any more work. I've spent your $200. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. And in my research, I had used oscilloscopes and stimulators and things that I, quite frankly, computers, I didn't know anything about them. I was just a user. And it really pissed me off. So I called my dad up and I said, you know what? I think I want to learn about this technology stuff. I think it's going to be important. So I want to take a leave of absence with 9 months left and go to graduate school. And I think I'm going to have to go to undergraduate school for at least one semester and take a bunch of requirements like fluid mechanics and computer programming and digital logic. And then I want to go to graduate school. And they have a biomedical engineering program here at Duke. And my dad, who was just an amazing guy, said, okay. Then I went to the dean of both the engineering school and the medical school. And I told him, I just had a very bad experience, and I don't ever want to rely on somebody else to do this ever again. I want to be able to do it. And so that began another 2.5-year odyssey of going to first taking undergraduate classes, and I was a lot older than the undergrads, and then graduate classes in engineering, electronics, programming. Oh, you can't even imagine all the classes I took and all the things I designed. And while I was doing that, I built both a wrist-based heart rate monitor that I later licensed off to a famous watch company, takes a licking and keeps on ticking. And then I built an ultrasound, a Doppler ultrasound for monitoring the heart. And I ended up licensing that. And then I finished medical school. I finished my 9 months, and I was going back to Oklahoma, to the University of Oklahoma for my training. So I had literally, and by the way, a month before I'm leaving for medical school, the assistant dean, who was this wonderful little 4'11" Jewish yenta, pediatrician, said, I've got the girl for you. This is part of the story, critical part. And she gave me her number. She'd be fired for that today without approval. And remember, that's a hard line. This is 1983. It's a hard line. There's no cell phones. And so I called this lady up and I said, hey, Dr. Osterhout introduced us. And she said, yeah, she just told me about this and I said, let's go have dinner. She says, no, I don't know you well enough to have dinner, but I'll have lunch with you because I'm here. She's a first-year medical student. She'd been an undergraduate at Duke, was an AB Duke Scholar, Phi Beta Kappa. AB Duke Scholar means she had a full ride to Duke, merit scholarship. It's the top thing. And she said no. And so we got into an argument. So hung up. Nothing was going to happen. And my apartment mate said, okay, let's have her over for brunch. So called her up, said, okay, come over and have brunch at our apartment. And so I went and picked her up in my Corvette that I had bought with the money I'd gotten for licensing. My friends were eating ramen noodles, and I bought myself
Not bad.
that. Okay.
Not bad for a med student.
It beats working. I wasn't eating ramen noodles anymore. And then I brought her over, and she would tell you a slightly different story. We kind of hit it off, and 2 weeks later, I asked her to marry me 41 years ago.
Everybody, quick break. If you're a medtech CEO or a product leader, you're going to want to listen to this sound. I want you to imagine you're about to have a product launch. You've poured your time, your budget, your reputation into a device you're about to launch. And after all of that effort, your FDA submission, boof, gets rejected because of cybersecurity. This sounds dramatic, but it's actually not. It happens all the time to medtech companies, especially recently with everything being digitized. This happens so often because medtech companies treat cybersecurity as a checkbox when it's now a non-negotiable design pillar. The FDA's 2023 guidance didn't suggest cybersecurity, it demanded it. So if you're not ready with threat modeling, penetration testing, SBOM management, incident response, and airtight documentation, you're not launching, period. And here's what most entrepreneurs don't realize. Scrambling to fix these issues last minute can cost over $250,000 and delay your launch by months, which imagine the investment of getting delayed, right? The more you spend time in review limbo with the FDA is lost revenue, lost market share, and lost investor confidence. And yet, so many founders and entrepreneurs I talk to, they still treat cybersecurity as a postscript instead of a strategic advantage. Now, I've held off bringing this to my audience as a topic until now because there just wasn't a medtech-focused cybersecurity firm that I trusted, and that changed when I found Blue Goat Cyber. They specialize exclusively in medtech cybersecurity. They've helped companies like bioMérieux, Inogen, Natera, along with nimble startups to get to market faster with a 100% FDA success rate. I had the chance to meet the founder, Christian Espinosa, and his story really resonated with me. So after he sold his first cybersecurity company, Alpine Security, Christian actually faced a personal health crisis. He ended up in the hospital, and that moment made him realize how vital and vulnerable medical devices really are because a medical device saved his life. So he built Blue Goat to serve medtech CEOs and founders just like you. Whether you're pre-revenue or scaling fast, Blue Goat can offer fixed-free pricing, unlimited retests, and no surprises. This isn't bolt-on security. This is built in from day one. You wouldn't launch a device that hasn't been clinically validated, so why would you risk launching one that's vulnerable to attack? Blue Goat will secure your device, simplify your submission, accelerate your approval, and they'll do it in a way that fits your budget, your timeline, and your team. So here's what I want you to do next. Go to bluegoatcyber.com, schedule a discovery call. They do these amazing calls. They'll do an analysis with you, educate you more, because the cost of waiting could be everything that you've worked for. So that being said, go to bluegoatcyber.com and schedule that call now. Let's get back to the episode.
So 4 kids and grandkids later, she's a rheumatologist at USC and came here. I brought this gal to Oklahoma City, to the University of Oklahoma, and then we had a baby. She had a baby. That's our daughter. She's 39 years old, and we're going to have another baby. And I have a new invention, and I'm in training. I have a new invention. Nobody wanted to license it. Again, I got pissed off. Well, if nobody wants to license this invention, and it's a great idea, it's fantastic. So like I did before, I went to my dad and I went to my wife and I said, I think I'm going to drop out of my training and start a company. Now, you got to understand, Omar, I didn't know anything about business. Nothing. Zero. Less than zero.
What year was this roughly?
This was 86, 87.
Context for people, back then, I think entrepreneurship is a lot more widely accepted now.
Absolutely.
But back then, this is like, when you're dropping out of training, this is like public shaming is about to start, and your entire family is going to revolt.
Well, they were both highly skeptical. Let me put it that way. So my mentor here at Oklahoma was the chief of cardiology, the late Dr. Ralph Lazare. And on Friday, we have a lectureship. We have the chief of cardiology of the University of Washington coming that I endowed. And that's part of the reason I'm here. And then my mentor back at Duke, Dr. Galen Wagner, both communicated to my wife and my dad that Dave will just come back and be an academic cardiologist. What are you worried about? It isn't going to be a problem. And that was good because they were not very enthusiastic about, we have one resident's salary, we have a baby, we have another baby coming, and I'm going to take some of the nest egg I had earned and go blow it. That's what they thought. And again, my two mentors said, that's okay. Just let him do it. He'll be okay. And that was very unusual, but they were great visionary doctors, cardiologists. They were visionaries. And so I did, and I didn't know anything, but I recruited one of my friends from Harvard to come be essentially the chief operating officer, and several of the engineers from biomedical engineering graduate school, two guys with masters and one guy with a PhD, to come to Oklahoma City and start this company. And we were going to build an EKG microscope, which we built. And we sold it. We got up to $2 million in revenue. We sold it to every major medical center, to Mayo and Mass General and Columbia and Duke. We sold it around the world. And then, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I was learning by the seat of my pants, raising capital, which I had to do, HR, marketing, sales. I recruited some smart people. That was the best thing I did. And so then we got sued for patent infringement. We won a summary judgment in district court. And I said, and then the company appealed to what was then the brand new Special Court of Appeals for patent. So they set that up in the early 80s. And so this was brand new. And this was a patent about litigation about software patents. And the Supreme Court had basically said you can't patent software. So what happened was we got overruled. They won in the Court of Appeals, and the Special Court of Appeals basically overruled the previous Supreme Court finding. Now that's come all full circle. We have this Alice, I know a lot about patents and litigation now, but we had another Supreme Court decision, the Alice decision, that has tightened up the whole notion of software patents. Now we have AI patents, and people, again, I know, unfortunately, I have the most expensive education of my life, and I've had expensive educations. This has been on patents. So we ended up selling the company to the company that sued us because we had way better technology, and that was fine. And got some money, and I'm sitting there. It's about 1991. And as part of my company, we had done a deal with what was at the time Hewlett-Packard's medical group, and in fact, their cardiology group, which was in a little town in Oregon called McMinnville, Oregon. And I had traveled there multiple times, and they had licensed our technology. And to this day, I know, because I had one of their engineers here several years ago tell me they saw my name in source code at Philips, which is what ended up buying HP's medical group. So the ultrasound and the cardiology stuff, Philips bought them when actually HP spun off medical into their test and measurement company. And then that company spun off the medical and sold it to Philips. And that was all 25 years ago. So what happened? So in this licensing, I had been taken, one of the engineers working on our project at HP took me down to where he had come from, which was in Corvallis, Oregon. Corvallis, Oregon is where Oregon State is, but it was a large Hewlett-Packard facility that made, for those who are old enough, Hewlett-Packard calculators, reverse Polish notation, okay? 1 enter 1 plus, okay? You didn't do 1 plus 1 equals like the TI calculators. And they showed me the first palm-top personal computer. And it was this little thing. It opened up. It had a QWERTY keyboard and this very low-resolution LCD screen. But I said, oh, my God. And we were using IBM PCs at the time and Toshiba laptops and all kinds of things. I said, this is amazing. He said, yeah, and you can program it in BASIC and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm out of a job. It's okay. We're not going to starve. We have 2 kids at the time, boy and a girl, and early 1990s. And I had an idea. And I said, I think these things are going to be critical for medicine, for doctors. They're going to use these things, and they're going to be able to look at things like EKGs on these devices. So I said, I'm going to start another company. And this time people actually kind of believed me. And so I didn't have to use my own money, or at least not much of it. I built a prototype and of a device that could receive wirelessly. And by the way, I used the paging network and got a bunch of patents that have been used many, many times. Really early, Motorola was like, how'd you think of this? I said, because I'm crazy. That's how. And Hewlett Packard came to us and said, you took that idea from us. I said, no, I didn't. And then they later said, yeah, you're right, you didn't. But you got to give us, don't hold it against us for trying to say you took it from us. And so I started a company called Data Critical. And I recruited a CEO because I knew I'm not a CEO. I got a recruiter. I got venture capitalists, including new NEA. NEA in Silicon Valley on Sand Hill Road was our lead venture capitalist. Number of other named venture capitalists. We started this company and built it throughout the 1990s as the internet came in. And in 1999, we went public. And we had all kinds of ideas, including in 1996, I said, I think we can take an ECG device and send that wirelessly to a doctor who receives it wirelessly. So my whole idea was the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So directly from a patient, directly to a doctor who may be on the golf course. That was the analogy I used. And we patented that. And we actually got a 510K, amazing, because it was a Rube Goldberg. It had wires and what are called PCMCIA cards and palm top computers and cell phones you had to plug into. It was not a practical solution, but it was an idea. And I proved it was a proof of concept. So we didn't commercialize that, never happened. So then what happened? Well, the dot-com bust. And our stock, we were still growing literally 20% quarter on quarter, got trashed. And all of a sudden we get a phone call from GE Healthcare and they said, we'd like to buy your company. We're a public company. So they knew what our stock price was and they said, we'll double your stock price. And so at the time, all the venture capitalists were just crushed. They were crushed. So they said, yeah, let's do this. And I was like, okay, whatever. So in 2001, we sold to GE Healthcare. And actually our vote, because we were a public company, our shareholder vote was on 9/11/2001. The company was in Seattle, Washington, because we wanted to be close to Microsoft. It was all about technology. And Microsoft was the hot technology company at the time. Still is a pretty good company. Started by two of my former classmates, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. We're all Harvard class of 77. So by the way, so is Jim Cramer.
And I did not know Jim Cramer was of the same class.
Yeah, Harvard class 77, yeah. And then he went to law school.
Small world.
And Ballmer graduated. In our 25th reunion, I sat right next to Steve Ballmer. And I've met Bill Gates several times. The last time was at Vinod Khosla's house, but that's for later in the story. So then we sold. And I figured, okay, I got to pay out. By this time, we have 4 kids. We have 2 younger ones. And so we have 14 years from youngest to oldest, and 2 kids that are 3 years apart, 8 years, and 2 kids that are 21 months apart, and 3 boys and 1 girl. And so I was like, okay, my wife said, what are you going to do now? I said, I have no idea. 0 idea. But then I got a call. Would you come up to Milwaukee? And the guy who did that was a guy named Kevin King. Now, Kevin King may be known as former CEO of iRhythm. And before that, I think he was at another company, In Vitro or something. So he said, Dave, we'd like you to come work for us. I was like, really? You want me to come work for you? Okay. What am I going to do? Well, he didn't know what I was going to do, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I spent 1 year trying to figure out commuting to Milwaukee from Oklahoma City. Where are the toilets and what do they do? And so at the end of the year, I had a 360 review, and they said, you suck. And they were probably right. From their perspective, I sucked. I didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do with me. And so I figured I'm toast. They get rid of me, but they gave me a pass. And they said, by the way, we're going to put you under a different person. And the person they put me under was the chief technology officer of what was GE LiveCor Systems. And he said, "You're in this patient monitoring group, but you're cardiology. So we got a big cardiology business. Why don't you go over to cardiology?" And then I was with my peeps because actually I knew a bunch of these people because in the 80s and then at Data Critical, we had dealt with a company called Marquette Electronics. And so Marquette was the major competitor to HP Healthcare. And so I dealt with both of them. And so I had a lot of friends in cardiology at GE Healthcare. It had been bought by GE, Marquette had, because it's in Milwaukee. And so I said, great. And I was with my peeps. And what was interesting is GE cardiology was a nascent concept. I mean, they had EKG machines and treadmills and Holter monitors, but they also had ultrasound devices, of which they were the leader in cardiac ultrasound. They had CT, MR, cath lab, EP lab systems, Pruka lab system. Matt Pruka, who the company they bought, I knew him well from, again, the 80s. And so I said, I know all this stuff. I know everything here. And I was like the only person. Probably today it's the same thing. And so I became the chief scientist of GE Cardiology in slightly, so it would have been 2001, 2002. And I was there for 2 years. And my boss left, and they put me under the CTO of GE Healthcare, a guy named Gene Sarganese, who later became the CEO of Philips Imaging. And he reported to Joe Hogan, who was the CEO of GE Healthcare at the time, who later went to ABB as the CEO, left GE. A lot of GE alumni went off and became CEOs of things like Boeing and Home Depot and things. And he went to ABB. And he said, you know all this stuff, and we don't have anybody, and we're trying to sell heart hospitals and integrated solutions. You're my man. And I said, yeah, I can do this. So I got to go to GE Labs, look at all the newest stuff and help them figure out if it was helpful. And so for 2 years, I got incredible reviews and everybody. So then in late 2003, going into 2004, I decided I've had all this I could stand, because I could see this company, it needed to be changed. And so I went to my boss and I said, I'm going to leave. He said, no, you can't leave. You just can't leave. I don't have anybody to replace you with. This is ridiculous. I can hire a cardiologist. He won't know anything about any of this technology. And you know the technology. You know the cardiology. Don't leave. And I said, no, I'm leaving. But that's okay. He said, you got to do two things for me. You got to go down to these meetings. They used to have in January these meetings in Florida at Boca and Breakers, which were two meetings of all the GE executives would go. And then later they had me something called the Whitney Symposium, which was an R&D meeting they had up at GE Labs in Niskayuna, which is Schenectady, New York, where GE Labs was. And you go into the front door, I don't even know if it exists, and you saw Thomas Edison's desk and his chair, because that was GE comes from Thomas Edison. So I made them a presentation, and I gave it at 3 different venues, and then I was gone in 2004. And I had no idea what I was going to do. But I knew that, okay, I'm okay now. And I fooled around with stuff and different things. So then let's go to 2007.
Okay.
So that's a couple of years later. And Steve Jobs does his one more thing and introduces the iPhone. And I go, my 1996 idea. This is the implementation. It's a phone, it's a computer, it's programmable, it's got a big screen. This is how we do it. So I called up a guy, an engineer, 2 engineers in Australia who I'd known for 20 plus years. They had been in the medical business. And because I had no lab, I had no equipment, I had no nothing. And I said, this is what we're going to do. And he said, no, mate, we can't do it because Apple's got it all locked up. It's no way to do this. And I said, I got an idea. And I know how to do it. And they were skeptical, but I'm a persuasive dude. So I convinced them all the way in Australia to go with me here. And so over the course of about 9 months, they went with me. And then the 3 of us went to Hong Kong to a manufacturer I had met in Hong Kong, at their factory was in Shenzhen. And I said, here's our design. This is what we want you to do. We want you to make an iPhone case for an iPhone 4, and it's got this integrated EKG device that talks to the phone and displays it. And so December 14th, 2010, my birthday, okay, I received a box with 15 prototypes of this iPhone 4 case. And I thought, this is super cool. Now, this is going to get me in trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway. So in March of that year, I had gone up to GE Healthcare, and I said, I got this great new idea of a personal EKG device that this smartphone implements. And I demoed it for them. And these are people I knew. One of them I'd known for 20 plus years. Now 30, he's a close friend, and I have tremendous respect for him. He's still at GE. And they sent me out, and they brought me back 15 minutes later and said, Dave, there's only two problems. This sounds really cool, but number one, no Medicare patient is going to pay $99. So this is 2010, March, April. They just said they're not. And number two, no doctor is going to interpret that EKG without a CPT code and getting reimbursed, because that's the world they live in. Hospital-based medicine, their technology is hospital-based, physician-based, CPT codes, patients have it, reimbursed. This whole thing was totally new to them, and it just seemed a bridge too far. So I said, good luck, Dave. So then I get that box of prototypes. And on December 30th, I have a little office in Oklahoma City. I go to my office and I make an unscripted 4-minute video. And the reason I made that video, and by the way, there's a backstory. The backstory is my youngest, who's today 26, and works at a big law firm in DC, a Harvard grad, and he made YouTube videos to modify Nerf guns. He'd modify them, CO2 cartridges. I mean, they would shoot a Nerf thing like 200 yards. It was unbelievable. So it was a community of these people. And so I said, you know what? I need to send this video to people. And I guess YouTube's the way you do that. So my 9-year-old taught me how to do that, how to make a video and upload it to YouTube. This is facts. And so December 30th, I go to my office. I make this unscripted 4-minute video because I'm going to the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, the next week. And 3 or 4 companies that I wanted to show this to weren't going to be there. So I was going to send them this video, which is a demo video. And finish the thing unscripted, one take. And as I'm uploading it, there's a little box that says upload, send a link or message to your LinkedIn connections. And I had about 300 LinkedIn connections, which were from GE and Philips and my business connections. That was my social media. And so I clicked that. I have no idea why I did that. And then I hit upload. I watched it upload, and then I shut down my computer and I went home. And the next day was New Year's Eve, and I had a date with my wife. For anybody who's married, have date night. I had a date with my wife, and we went out, saw the new year in bed. 2:00 in the morning, my phone rings. I have an iPhone 4, by the way. And it's my partner in Australia. And he goes, mate, what did you do? I said, what do you mean, what did I do? He said, you uploaded a video to YouTube. I said, yeah, that's right. He says it has 200,000 views. I said, what? Yeah, and they're just coming like crazy. And I go, you got to be kidding me. He said, no. Well, the next day was a Saturday. And that night I got called at 12 midnight by the producer of Good Morning America and Fox and Friends. And they said, Dr. Albert, I had put my email address in the dadgum video. He said, you're going to be at CES. I said, I'm going to CES. Anybody who wants to be there, get a hold of me. My inbox was just getting hammered. And they both said, we'd like you to be at our CES thing. You got to be up at 4 a.m. because it's 7 o'clock on the East Coast. And so I was on Good Morning America and Fox and Friends. I go to CES and I am just inundated by people, including a certain company in Cupertino who sent a team of people to find me. And they found me. And I had 3 meetings over 24 hours with these people. They wanted to know how the hell I did this. How did you make? Because we thought we had this thing locked out, like my partner. Well, it's because I'm a orthogonal thinker is what I. So I got up at 3 a.m. and I went to the convention center and talked my way in, and I was on Fox and Friends at 7 a.m. East Coast time, and Good Morning America from their, they always have a CES show that week, and it went crazy from there. And
for context, I was going to say for the viewers, for anybody who's watching on YouTube and Spotify, I'm going to bring up that video. It's a 3-minute long video, but I'm going to bring up like one of the main areas. Dr. Albert, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so here I'm going to press play.
Now, the next thing I do is showing you the baseline. Now I'm going to grab this by my hands, and we will move it forward. And there you see my ECG, and this is lead 1. So lead 1 is left arm minus right arm, conventional ECG. You can see the P waves, and I'm not holding it very stable. If I was holding it in my lap, it would be a completely clean ECG.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit.
And now you'll see a very clean ECG. QRS detector will be detecting the ECG here shortly. It's changing. Now it's identifying the beats. And you can see I am detecting and storing, wirelessly transmitting as well as storing locally, my ECG in real time.
And sending it to the cloud, which was, nobody knew what the cloud was. They thought it was Cumulus.
Yeah, and I was going to say, for people to understand, I mean, back in 2010, 2011, so 200,000 views back then in terms of context of ratio of what YouTube was is might as well be like 2 million views now. And on top of that, seeing something like that, I remember when I was in medical school seeing that, and it was like watching magic happen. Because you're looking at it and you're like, wait, where are the leads? Like, how's that happening? So it was literally like, I feel like the internet and technology from the early 2000s through to 2015 was literally like watching magic happen. Well, I would say like
that's interesting you say that, because so I'm inundated. I go home. I'm walking in the front door of my house, and the 9-year-old is standing there. He says, "Dad, you've made it." I go, "I've made it?" He said, "You've made it when you have YouTube haters." And he said, because of my video, I had these people that said, "This is fake. This is not, you can't do this." In fact, there was a biomedical engineering blog out of Slovakia that my partners had found. And I have 2 t-shirts with the original foreign language. And they said, "iPhone ECG, fake as bitch." In Slovakia, and they translated with Google Translate because they said, "This is fake. You can't do this." And a few weeks later, I had a guy named Dr. Eric Topol called me and said, "Dave, you got to give me one of these things." And Eric is probably the world's most famous cardiologist, and he's diagnosed heart attacks, AFib on airplanes using my device. He put us in 3 of his books. And I had a number of other doctors who wanted to meet me at the Heart Rhythm Society, which was coming in May. And so I was able to raise some venture capital. And I said, I want to have a Silicon Valley. I was up to Seattle with my first company. I want to have a Silicon Valley startup. So I go to San Francisco, and a venture capitalist there, along with the venture capital arm of Qualcomm, said, "Yeah, we're in. This is cool. This is amazing." And so I put AliveCor I still living in Oklahoma City, in San Francisco. I was incubated in this venture capital office, and we started, and we went to Hong Kong and get manufacturing. And I had FDA people call me, because one of my students, when I was a grad student at Duke, one of my undergraduate biomedical engineering students was at the FDA in the cardiovascular group. And he called me on the floor at CES and said, "Dave, what are you doing? You can't do this." And I go, "Well, do you think I'm a 55-year-old doctor? What do I know about viral videos?" I said, "I know nothing. This is accidental. I did not mean it to go viral." And by the way, by Sunday, we had 400,000 views. So it was just Friday was 200,000 views. It was just nuts. And it just kept going up. And I started getting paid. And I paid my 9-year-old all the money I got from YouTube for the advertisements they put in it. I gave it all to him. I said, dude, you deserve, a couple $100, I think, over a year or two. So then
I love it.
We're there. So the next January, next CES, Qualcomm has a booth with kiosk where they have their companies at Qualcomm Ventures, and I have a kiosk. And it happened to be that we were in Scientific American's World-Changing Ideas, and we were number 2. World-Changing Ideas. It was really cool.
Who's number 1?
I forget, but we were right up there. And they said, smartphone ECG, this is going to make a difference. And so I'm standing at this kiosk, and I have my daughter with me who was helping me because I can't be at the kiosk all day long. And I'm standing there, and this guy walks up to me, and he goes, my name is Vinod Khosla, and I want you to come see me. And for those who don't know, Vinod Khosla, one of the 2 or 3 most successful venture capitalists, Khosla Ventures. He was first private money into OpenAI and a lot of other things, a billionaire and a futurist, brilliant guy. And so I went to see him, and he said, I want in. And so today he is the chairman of the board of AliveCor and our lead investor, and a good lead investor to have, because he believes, and he said, we're going to have a long way to go with this, because nobody knows. Digital health wasn't a term in 2011. It was, what is that? And there were no investors who invested in digital health. What I heard from GE I heard from lots of them. You had to be somebody like a Qualcomm who bet on lots of things, or a Vinod Khosla who sees the future, to say this is a good idea and this is going to become mainstream. And so, we applied for 510Ks. The first year that we had product, we had $1 million in revenue. But we didn't have a 510K. How did we do that legally? We sold it to veterinarians, which are not covered. And so I can tell you, in the last month, I have bonobos, I have rhinos, as well as dogs, cats, and horses all over the world whose ECGs are taken with our device. And it's used by thousands.
I got to ask about that. So I've heard of a few existing medtech companies today where they've developed their device and they've gone straight to veterinary care because it's cash based. You can start generating revenue. Was that a big part of like you generating revenue and then when you raised again, you didn't have to generate
revenue and not having to wait for 510K. Okay. Not having to deal with that regulatory issue. And so it was a combination. So our first year in business, we had $1 million of revenue.
That's amazing. Unheard of.
I can just say we're significantly larger than that today. But so then became the slog, because 510Ks, things, personal ECG, digital health, is this real? Smartphones. First thing people told me is nobody over 65 has a smartphone. That's probably pretty true in 2010. Today, it's not true at all. Everybody has a smartphone. But we had to get through that. I would say that's where the venture capitalists funded us across the chasm as we built it. So then we continue to grow the business. And in 2018, from Cupertino, from the Steve Jobs Theater, Apple introduces ECG on their Apple Watch. And we had an Apple Watch ECG device that they knew all about. And I thought we were dead. And our CEO at the time thought we were dead. And Vinod Khosla said, this is the best thing that ever happened to you. Our sales doubled.
And he validated the market.
Yeah, he said, the world's biggest company, biggest brand, you've been a little voice saying, personal ECG, this is important. And now they came in and said, yeah, this is important. He said, so while you have a big competitor, what you have is market validation in a market that was immature and small at the time. And he was right. He was absolutely right.
And I was going to say, like, in the ECG space, compared to everybody else, AliveCor, aside from pioneering personal ECG, you guys have, I think, well over 110 or 120 like peer-reviewed publications.
250.
And a lot of like,
250 peer-reviewed publications.
Thank you for that correction.
We blow everybody else out of the water. It's a 10x, not just 10 more, 10x, because that's the world I came from. I have 150 publications personally in cardiology, and I got 4 abstracts going into American Heart this week. This was the life I knew, so I knew we had to validate this brand new technology that people thought might be a toy. And as a matter of fact, in 2012, I was invited to the Heart Failure Society of America, Seattle, Washington, and to give an invited lecture on this personal ECG device. And the moderator of that session was the world's second most famous cardiologist, Eugene Braunwald, 92 or 3 years old now, sitting there. And I brought his book, Heart Disease, and he autographed it for me then. I have that in my library. I see your library behind you. And I gave this lecture. And when I was finished, people put their hands up. One guy gets up, Dr. Albert. Looks interesting, but it's not a 12-lead ECG. It's just one lead. Now, how good is that? How valuable is that? For those who don't remember back a long time ago in political campaigns, the late Senator Lloyd Benson debated Dan Quayle, who was the vice presidential candidate and vice president. And Dan Quayle was young, was George H.W. Bush's running mate, and he said, I'm as old as Jack Kennedy. Lloyd Benson was ready for that. He said, I know Jack Kennedy, knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine, and you're no Jack Kennedy. And so
that was a brutal one. I remember that.
It was brutal. I mean, they lost, but it was a brutal takedown of Dan Quayle. And then, so I was ready for this question. And I said, you are correct, sir. However, how many leads does an automatic external defibrillator or an implantable defibrillator need to decide to save your life? The answer is 1. He just sat down. I said, so that's a pretty valuable application. And so I was ready for that. It's where preparation, beats intelligence anytime. So I was.
And I was going to say, I'm sure fast forward to today, I'm going to bring up AliveCor's website now. You guys can go to AliveCor.com, and you have a 12-lead device now, correct?
Yeah, we have a revolutionary 12-lead device. And
weren't you wearing it when I saw you?
I was wearing it. Yeah, I was wearing it. And we have a 6-lead device in addition to several 1-lead devices. So we have a product portfolio, which we have to do because when you're competing against Apple, Samsung, and Google, just 3 of the world's biggest companies, you better be more innovative and faster on your feet. So I think that's, and by the way, we've also been pushed along by our chairman, who is a huge AI advocate and was 10 years ago, that AI is going to be critical. So we've had huge efforts on AI for a long time. We have 320 million ECGs in our cloud.
How many ECGs do you guys collect on every day?
1.3 million every week. So divided by 7. So not quite 200,000 a day. So we have the data that nobody else has, to be honest with you. And that enables us to build and develop some really phenomenal AI. But we continued to grow. And then the pandemic hits. Okay. I've moved to California from Oklahoma City. Why? My kids are all grown and gone. My wife comes in and says one day, our daughter-in-law is pregnant. Our son he went to University of Oklahoma Medical School. He's a resident at Cedars-Sinai, was doing a fellowship, and his wife, our daughter-in-law, was pregnant with our first grandchild. And my wife says, we're moving to California. And I'm a very, very smart man. So what did I say? Yes, dear.
Yes, dear.
Yes, dear.
And you know how I know that? Because that was one piece of advice you gave me the night that we met.
That's it.
I deploy it consistently.
I moved, and so we're there. We move in 2019. I got there, and she said, I'm moving early because I got a job at USC as an assistant professor, and you're gonna close the house and sell it and do all those things. Yes, dear, I will. So I moved later. I packed the last of the stuff in the car and drove out there to California. And then LiveCor's going and blowing, but then this pandemic thing hits. And my last trip was in March of 2020. And I was at Emory, and then I was up at GE Healthcare, and then the world shuts down. What happened to AliveCor? Our business doubled again because people didn't want to go to doctors. They were scared. And we have a device, and you can buy it off Amazon and be delivered to you, or you can buy it at CVS or Best Buy. And so our business doubled again. So then the pandemic rolls around. We are introducing our 6-lead ECG and a bunch of new AI and getting lots of 510Ks and then what happens next is I thought pandemic's going to be over. Our sales will drop back down. Nope, just kept going. Because we started to advertise on television and we got tremendous. So we created a brand. It took a lot of money, but the good news is we were making money. So it took a lot of money, but we've spent 9 figures to create one of the only, I think, consumer brands in digital health. People know Kardia.
How in the early days, driving that early adoption was so important, especially Apple came out with the Apple Watch not too long after you guys were on the market. So what kind of things did you guys do in the early days to really drive that adoption behavior?
First of all, we focused on proving our technology, getting people to publish peer-reviewed papers on its accuracy and utility in various applications. We went into new areas, the 6-lead ECG, and it monitors and has both FDA clearance and applications in areas that you can't do with an Apple Watch or even with our single-lead devices. And then we had the lowest cost device. You can buy our device in Walmart for, I don't know, $69, $79. I don't even know. The point is, if you're getting in and you don't want to spend a lot of money, and you might have an Android phone, not an iPhone, then an Apple Watch isn't going to work. So ours works with anything. And so we began television advertising. And I can tell you, I've taken a lot of heat because we would advertise on Fox News. And people said, these are blah, blah, blah politics. And I go, you know what? My politics are completely different from theirs. But I took a Hippocratic oath in 1981. I don't ask somebody if they're red or blue, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. If they need help, I'm going to help them. So please just understand that. That is not in my calculus when it comes to customers we serve, and we're here to help people. And so
I love that.
That's just, somebody has a cardiac arrest. I don't say, excuse me, sir, who'd you vote for? No. So we've built a brand and we advertise and people know us. Many people I've been sitting, lots of funny things. My daughter has gone to the doctor and doctor said, well, if you're having palpitations, you should get one of these Kardias. And she just starts laughing. She told me, this is several years ago. She said, my dad invented it. She went, what? Well, I've had that happen a lot of times, many, many times where people said, you invented that? I go, well, yes, but that's not important. So we've continued to grow. We've continued to innovate. You showed our Kardia 12L. We have our Kardia 6L. We're used by every major, by the way, Mayo Clinic is an investor in our company now. So full disclosure on that. We've been a partner. I just looked at the top 25 cardiac centers for Newsweek or U.S. News and World Report. Every one of them is our customer. Every one of them have patients that use our device, thousands of them. So on any given day, 1 million people have a Kardia that they're using around the world. And we're in 43 countries. So it has grown, to be honest with you, Omar, way beyond what I thought would happen in 2010. Never could I have imagined that this notion would turn into where we are today. And so that's it.
And let me ask you, so on that note, you mentioned Eric Topol, and one of the things that he had talked about in a long time ago was this sort of new paradigm where, you empower patients to capture and even self-diagnose certain conditions. In this case, like with cardio, would be things like atrial fibrillation before seeing their doctor. What do you see the future of healthcare? Is that the future where we start enabling and empowering patients with technology to self-diagnose, catch things earlier on, and self-refer themselves to primary care versus having to wait for a terrible outcome?
That's happening today. You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, he told me, he said, Dave, I'm not surprised when a patient comes in and says, well, Dr. Topol, I have atrial fibrillation. What do we do now? Okay. Because they've diagnosed it, whether with a Kardia or with an Apple Watch, they've diagnosed it. And we know those are accurate devices. What do I do now? And so I think that will happen more, whether it's early diabetes, hypertension, any of the metabolic diseases. I mean, look at the amazing uptake of the GLP-1s. I mean, we had an obesity epidemic. We still do. But these are revolutionary devices. And what are we finding out? They're not just for obesity. They're not just for diabetes. They help with brain disease and liver disease and cardiac disease. They're amazing medications, and we haven't run out all their clinical utility yet. And so I think you're going to have people were getting them from hims and hers. And so they, not only were we having diagnosis, but we're having treatment that's direct to consumer. And an old saying that I've used now a lot is, not every consumer is a patient, but every patient is a consumer. And so you need to treat them just like that, where they live. And I think this is an inevitable trend, inevitable. And so the smartphone is the front door to healthcare, as it's the front door to banking and the front door to transportation. And I think that trend's not slowing down.
And I know you're very passionate about shifting this focus in cardiology from essentially just treating only sick people to essentially getting to the point of preventing diseases. And so you mentioned treating things like obesity, hypertension, et cetera. How do you feel like how cardiac monitoring can essentially fit into this sort of broader vision of preventative health and chronic disease management? If we scope out like 20, 30 years from now, what would that look like?
We'll have who knows what kind of sensors, who knows how continuous they will be, how ubiquitous, how non-invasive, non-contact they will be, but inevitably they will be that. And then we will absolutely need, in one of my lectures, AI, because no doctor can consume that tsunami of information. So we're going to need AI to, just like ChatGPT can summarize an article for you, to summarize that data and extract the clinical insights you need to help that patient. And patients are going to be using that, and physicians are going to be using that. And so you'll have this convergence of both sensing technology and artificial intelligence that hopefully allows us to predict. And in medicine, prediction is the same thing as prevention. So if we can predict, then we know your coronary disease, you're starting to develop plaque. Okay, it's time to be on a statin. It's time to change your diet. You can intervene at an earlier stage. And so I think that's an inevitable trend. And again, we'll just continue. My crystal ball is in the shop, Omar. It's broken, but I can say that while I don't know exactly where we're going to go, I know it's going to be up and to the right.
I think to your point on prediction, I feel that the companies that have done the best job to automate the data capture and to capture data on a continuous basis are going to be the ones that will be able to train these models. And AliveCor is definitely doing that. You said it was 1.7 million ECGs a week, correct?
1.3 million a week.
1.3.
Almost 200,000 a day. So, 1.3 million.
So here's a question I have to ask, is that as a clinician and as a technologist and a consumer of tech, what wearables do you wear on a daily basis? So you got the Oura Ring.
I don't know if you saw the CNN article from about 10 days ago of a Dr. TJ Trad using his Cardio card to manage a heart attack victim on an international flight. This is not the Oura. This is the Ultrahuman. So this is a company out of India, which is now being sued by Oura, is a competitor to Oura. They gave me this, but I use this principally to monitor my sleep. Sleep is one of the most important healthcare concerns, just like diet, just like exercise. And so I monitor my sleep, and I can tell you when I'm on the road, it suffers. When I'm not in my bed and I don't have my wife to calm me down, my sleep suffers, and I'm able to objectively track that and maybe try to do something about it. So I think I like this. It's ubiquitous. I don't have to do anything. It's doesn't change my habits. And then if in my wallet I keep this credit card thing, which people are they're like amazed.
Tell us about the credit card thing real quick.
This is the world's thinnest ECG. So for those of you who have ever heard of a implantable loop recorder, the Medtronic Link, Medtronic pioneered that. The Link is very small, a third the volume of a AAA battery. So it's small. But it takes three of those stacked on top of each other, three of these stacked on top of each other to give you the width of a Link. That is, this is 1/3 the width. And this has battery, Bluetooth, microprocessor, analog electronics, all in a credit card. It took us 5 years. It can only be made in Taiwan, which is, by the way, the high-tech electronic manufacturing center of the world, TSMC and things. This can only be made in one factory because the technology in here is amazing. And so that goes in my wallet, goes in lots of people's wallets. Went in this Dr. Trad's wallet, and he used it it was CNN had a great story. It got a lot of pickup to care for this heart attack patient. And the guy said, "Doc, am I going to die?" To which he answered very quickly, "Not today, my friend, not today." And the patient did well. So I'm actually having dinner.
What's the name of that product, by the way? That's the KardiaMobile card, correct?
KardiaMobile card. And so again, we've come up with continuing innovation in terms of not only products but services, allowing you to get a cardiologist overread of your EKG from the app, goes out to a cardiologist, comes back to the app. So we continue to believe in this notion of a seamless experience. And I think that's where I've recruited my senior management team are almost all from Amazon, where they really understand dealing with the consumer and delivering to customer first experience. And in medicine, oftentimes the patient is secondary in our consideration. At least their experience is secondary.
And this is why I really want to have you on the show. And, I've really been impressed, following AliveCor. I always tell people that I feel like AliveCor is a great consumer brand that happens to be medical device, because you guys don't operate and look like a medical device company, because you've taken so much care into thought about the end user and like innovating around them. And I remember, 10 years ago, the number of products you had versus now, and how you've continued to sort of develop those products to make it more convenient, And I think you guys, you didn't have to come up with this card. You could have stopped, but coming up with this card to make it even more seamless and easy is really inspiring.
You asked about in other areas. So for instance, full disclosure, the company Omron is an investor in my company. They make the most popular blood pressure cuffs that you can buy in any drugstore. And so we've integrated that blood pressure information. People are working on cuffless blood pressure solutions. They're not any really fully accepted ones yet, but I'm sure that those will be developed, allowing you to have more ubiquitous, more continuous, or at least higher density readings, helping us better deal with hypertension, which is 1/3 of the population of the United States and around the world, billions of people. So we see anything in the cardiovascular space being in our domain, and we will continue to innovate within that domain to bring more complete solutions that, again, better predict and hopefully better prevent cardiovascular disease, which remains the number one killer. So that's our mission.
And on that topic, I gave a talk actually a couple of weeks ago at MD&M about the waves of technology and how the world's getting more and more complicated, and the importance of partnerships. While companies like an Apple are like competitors, do you see a future where in order to really solve like the larger and more complex problems in healthcare, that AliveCor has to start looking into more partnerships with these, let's say the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, the Teslas of the world?
We don't talk about what might happen, because you said we're a consumer company that happens to be in the medical business. I say we're a medical company that happens to sell directly to consumers, but that's just the other side of the coin. What I can tell you is GE Healthcare is another investor in our company, a partner of ours. So we have both consumer-facing healthcare in like Omron. We have consumer-facing technology in Qualcomm. We have direct, medical healthcare technology in GE Healthcare. And then we have the world's number one most prestigious provider in Mayo Clinic. All are partners and investors in AliveCor. And so we see partnerships as critical. I can't tell you the ones that we'll have in our future, but I can tell you we're working on expanding them. And they will be in all areas, whether it's healthcare directly, whether it's serving physicians, but certainly serving patients where they live. Because again, every patient's a consumer, and they spend 99.9% of their time not in front of a doctor, not in a healthcare institution. And so we need to serve them wherever and whenever they are.
There's a lot of entrepreneurs would dream to have those kind of like the kind of growth that you guys have had in partnerships. For a lot of the early stage and first time founders that are perhaps like listening right now, like what kind of advice do you have for them?
Persistence. You got to believe you're right. I thought, again, I had YouTube haters. It's fake. It's magic. And as an amateur magician, I really appreciated the magic comments. I did magic shows at birthday parties in medical school for beer money, I guess is what you would say. I would just tell you that focus on not your technology, but on the problem you're trying to solve. And that is that's a winning formula. If you focus on your technology and then go try to find a problem, oftentimes there's not a product market fit. And whether it's people like Chrissy Farr, who speaks eloquently about this, and others, you need to find a problem for which you can offer a unique solution, one way or the other. And I look at Sean Duffy and Omada. They're getting ready to go public, and I remember meeting Sean years ago. He's a medical school dropout when it was far more accepted than dropping out of medicine for him than it was when I did it. But he saw a problem and addressed a solution and has stuck with it and grown it to where it offers a lot of value to people so that they don't have to get into don't have to go to the doctor's office, don't have to go to the hospital. And I think that's really the thrust of digital health. Digital health in the hospital, everything in the hospital has been digitized for a long time. The EMR, it's 25 years old, really, the federal government funding it. But digitizing and connecting patients directly into the healthcare system, enabling them to intervene at an earlier stage, that's the promise of digital health. And that promise, I think, is starting to be realized. And I think we're in a good example of that.
I agree. And I appreciate you spending some time with us just as we round things out. Do you mind if we have a few more questions for you before we let you go?
Go for it.
So I want to go back. It seems like your father had a tremendous impact on you growing up. And I'm wondering if you think about all the times that your father spoke to you and gave you advice, what was the piece of advice that resonates the most with you that you still carry with you today?
Work hard and believe in what you're doing. He was as a coal miner's son in rural Oklahoma, to think he was going to become the valedictorian at the University of Oklahoma, Rhodes Scholar, and ultimately the Speaker of the House and first in line for the presidency. It was work hard, have a goal, and work hard. And that's the lesson I would give to all those young entrepreneurs. And by the way, entrepreneurs should be young by and large and not 55 years old, by the way.
I can think of a bunch of amazing entrepreneurs who got their start late in their careers. So you might be 70, but I think you're like 30 at heart. I want to dig into that. There's a little bit more. Can you be more specific and tell us more? What does that mean to believe in yourself?
By the way, what it also means is look yourself in the mirror and make sure you're not fooling yourself. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that you're able to take constructive criticism. In fact, you give it to yourself. Is this a good idea? Is this real? Go find detractors who think it's fake as bitch, and then see whether or not they have a good perspective or not. But at the same time, if you're not an absolute believer once you have that idea and aren't willing to stick to it, well, seldom are those entrepreneurs successful. It's believe that you have the ability to think rationally about your idea, about your venture, and to do the things that need to be done to make it a success. And those are all critical things. It's entrepreneurship. I've given a few entrepreneurship lectures over the last 25 years, and it always comes back to make sure you do your homework first.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely. I think that the interesting thing about entrepreneurship, after interviewing so many different people, myself having my own business, is that there's this fine balance of unwavering belief in what you're doing, but then also to be like not realistic, but I think like pressure test the idea. But once you have pressure tested and you have enough early evidence that like you have something here, that you're just unwavering in it.
It's drive, go, don't stop.
I wonder. I want to share something with you. I've never talked about this, but I'm wondering, because like you mentioned idea a lot in this episode, and I always had this belief, because like you can have an idea, but then you go out in the world and somehow there's another person with almost the same idea, right? How did that happen? So I have this saying that like, yeah, it's not that people have ideas, is that ideas have people. Do you feel like part of that is that once you have an idea, you just have to do the hard work of finding the other people who have that same idea to adopt and drive mass adoption of that idea? Do you feel like that's part of it?
Definitely a part of it. Absolutely a part of it. The notion of an early adopter, the notion of an Eric Topol, who says, I got to have this thing. This is going to be critical. You got to find those people who are going to share your idea. You may be the one who implements it. You may be the one who makes it a reality, but you've got to have those people who share in the belief that that's a good idea. And so you're absolutely right about that, Omar. That's important to certainly early success.
Mm-hmm. And last question for you. This is a fun one, but I'm here with my library. We've talked a lot about books, but I'm wondering, like in your career, like not just for entrepreneurship, but life, what 2 or 3 books do you feel like you gift or most recommend to people?
I'm a hard sci-fi fan. Okay, so the 3-Body Problem and the whole series of books, Dark Forest, etc., that series was just amazing. I just finished one called Prox. I would highly recommend it. It's another hard science fiction book. I try to stay away. I read a lot of medical literature all the time, but I want to get away. And when my wife and I take a trip, I usually have a nonfiction and usually a science fiction book that I take with me. And so Malcolm Gladwell, Michael Lewis, these are my go-to guys. I've read all their books, whether it's Blink or The Big Short. These are fantastic nonfiction books. And then again, hard science fiction that makes you think, because science fiction of 100 years ago is science fact today.
Yeah, it's wild when you look back at some of the sci-fi books from 30, 40 years ago, and you're like, that's now.
Well, I see SpaceX land those boosters on a floating platform, and you go, wow. And at the same time, knowing how hard that is, you watch their rockets blow up. So and I remember the astronauts we've lost, whether it's the Challenger or back Apollo 1. The progress is not without a cost.
Dr. Albert, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was a lot of fun to have you on. For those who are listening, if you enjoyed this, please send this on to another founder or an entrepreneur. If you want to learn more, go to AliveCor's website. You can learn more at AliveCor.com. That's ALIVECOR.com. As always, I'm your host, Omar Khateeb.
Thank you.
Be sure to subscribe.
So much for this invitation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.